Hello everyone. Very good evening or a very good morning or afternoon, depending on which part of the world you are from. Welcome to the 7th lecture of the Inspiration series at Center for Research in Emerging Economics at Jindal Global Business School. Today we have Professor R. Edward Freeman with us, and the topic of the lecture is the power of and responsible business without trade-offs. I'm sure that Professor Freeman doesn't need an introduction, but still, let me just go ahead and introduce him. Professor Freeman is university professor, Olson professor and academic director of the Institute for Business and Society at the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business. He's best known for his award-winning book, Strategic Management, A Stakeholder Approach, which was published from Pittman in 1984 and reprinted by Cambridge University Press in 2010. His latest books are The Power of And, Responsible Business Without Trade-offs, with Vidhan Parmar and Kirsten Martin, forthcoming from Columbia University Press in 2020. The Cambridge Handbook of Stakeholder Theory with Jeffrey Harrison, J. Barney, and Robert Phillips, Cambridge University Press in 2019. Research Approaches to Business Ethics and Corporate Responsibility with Patricia Wellhand and Sergei Dmitriev, Cambridge University Press in 2017. And Bridging the Values Gap with Ellen Oster, Barrett Queller in 2015. He has received 6 honorary doctorates from Radboud University in the Netherlands, Universidad Pontificia Comillas in Spain, the Hanken School of Economics, Tampere University in Finland, Sherbrooke University in Canada, and Leuphana University in Germany for his work on stakeholder theory and business ethics. Dr. Freeman is co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Business Ethics, one of the leading journals in business ethics. He is a lifelong student of philosophy, martial art, and the blues. Dr. Freeman is a founding member of Red Goat Records, bringing the joy of original soul and rhythm and blues music into the 21st century. He's the host of the Stakeholder podcast, sponsored by Stakeholder Media LLC. Before we start, just a very brief outline of why this lecture is so important. So in today's world, where climate change is the real threat and the focus is more so ever on sustainability, business is no longer only about money. The focus is steadily moving to create value instead of profit. Professor Freeman's new book, The Power of And, Responsible Business Without Trade-offs, which he has co-written with Bobby Parmar and Kirsten Martin, it breaks many myths about business. The book questions the traditional and dominant narratives and writes a new story of business, and that is a human story. And Professor Freeman will tell you that story today. Professor Freeman, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Professor Sen. It's a real honor to be here and be a part of this lecture series. I really look forward to talking with people, and I'm going to save hopefully a lot of time for questions. In the middle of a pandemic, in which it's very easy, I think, to get depressed about all that's going on in the world. Maybe I'm only speaking for the U.S., but it's very easy to get depressed about that stuff. I want to bring some good news to the party. Let me try to set the stage for this good news first. There's been for a long time a debate and a struggle about the ethics of business or the ethics of capitalism, however you want to put it. And that's in part because there's a story about business and capitalism, a narrative, if you like, the main way we understand it, that's deeply rooted in cultures all over the world, not just an American thing. And when you think about the last 10 years, we have the vestigial effects of the global financial crisis, which we still see, and its effect on inequality around the world. We have, as Professor Sen said, we have the global warming debate, which is there. We see in a number of countries data that say, for the most part, people are unengaged or actively unengaged in their jobs. We see continued distrust of big business all around the world. And if we add to this a pandemic like nothing we've seen before, we have really a perfect storm for changing this old story. We're not going to find our way out of these issues. We're not going to solve these issues by doing more of the wrong thing. You know the old story. It goes like this. If you're students, you've probably been taught it at some time. Making money and profits is what really matters in business, says the old story. Business is really about the money and profits. And it's about serving shareholders or the so-called owners of the business. Business is best understood as sort of free, unregulated markets and subject to those market forces. And people in business are, pardon my language, greedy little bastards out trying to do each other in. They're narrowly self-interested creatures. And when I tell somebody I teach business ethics, people say that's an oxymoron. Two words you put together, they're a contradiction, like jumbo shrimp or my favorite, American football. I think I've heard all the jokes. Business ethics, a contradiction. Gee, must be a short course. Theoretical subject. I didn't know business had any, etc. And those issues make up, those ideas make up at least one version of the old story. We're not going to, as I said, solve the problems that we have by doubling down on this old story. And in fact, I think it rests on a number of mistakes. But I want to focus for a minute on the good news. There's a new story about business that's emerging. It's going to be the new normal, becoming a more conscious and more, more responsible business are going to be the table stakes in the 21st century for being successful. The short form of the argument goes like this. Look, purpose, stakeholders, ethics and values, sustainability, seeing business as a fully societal institution, those are going to be at least as important as profitability and will be seen as intimately connected to profitability. Now, there are lots of movements that take up some version of these ideas. There's been an increase in the past few years in interest in ideas that are kind of old ideas like corporate social responsibility or philanthropy or sustainability. We've seen the emergence of new ideas like social entrepreneurship. We've seen the emergence of new organizations like in the US, an organization called Just Capital that ranks something like 2,000 companies, public companies, based on how they're doing on ethics and creating value for their stakeholders, not just their shareholders. We've seen groups like Inclusive Capitalism and Conscious Capitalism. We have the GRI from the UN, the Sustainable Development Goals, and even Wall Street is getting into the act. We've seen incredible interest on impact investing, ESG, environment, society, governance, investing, socially responsible investing. And there's something called the Principles for Responsible Investment, which banks sign on to. Excuse me again. That's not a COVID cough, it's just a regular cough. That banks have signed on to that have over $9 trillion under management. And so this is really the new story is really a broad and deep one. I saw a newspaper recently that said even in a small country like Thailand, there's something like 5,000 social entrepreneurs. In the last days of the previous administration, the Obama administration, I was invited to the White House for a meeting of a lot of the thought leaders who were a part of these new organizations and movements. Thomas Perez, who was the Secretary of Labor under President Obama, And Tom wanted to find out how government could, speed up the adoption of this new story. And there are about 40 or 50 of us. And people say, well, what's the right brand? What brand is this going to be? It's not going to be shareholder capitalism. What are we going to call it? What's the brand? And of course, as you would imagine, most everybody thought their version was going to be the right brand. And I sat there thinking, well, maybe the brand question isn't the most interesting one. Suppose we tried to figure out, regardless of the brand, regardless of the final thing, what are the 4 or 5 most important ideas that whatever the new story of business is, it has to deal with these 4 or 5 important ideas. And so Bobby Parmar and Kirsten Martin and I decided to write The Power of and our argument is there are essentially 5 critical ideas. Now, again, these ideas are connected to each other, they're interconnected, and maybe there's a 6th one or a 7th one as well, but we focused on these 5. And I just want to talk about these 5 for a few minutes before we get to your questions. The first idea, and in the book, what we try to do is talk about the idea and then give lots of examples of companies that are putting the idea into practice. So this is decidedly not something that we kind of cooked up and then are looking for a way to apply it. It's our reading of what's really going on in business. So the first principle I'm going to call the purpose, values, and ethics principle. It says purpose, values, and ethics are as important as money and profits, and that profits follow from purpose. There's this idea, that the purpose of business is to make money for shareholders. Now look, I need red blood cells to live. I think I'm not much of a scientist, but I'm pretty sure about that. But it doesn't follow that the purpose of my life is to make red blood cells. Even if I'm recovering from surgery and I've lost a lot of blood, which has happened to me, and I got to focus on making red blood cells, do all the right stuff, it still doesn't follow that the purpose of my life is to make red blood cells. Now, business is the same way. Businesses have to have profits to live. I mean, this idea that profits are somehow bad or evil, it's what I've often called a business sucks story. Well, it's kind of morally questionable, people believe. No, profits, every company, whether it's for-profit or even not-for-profit organizations, has to make enough money to pay everybody and has to make enough money to invest in the future. So the idea that profits are bad is really a bad idea. But it doesn't follow from that the purpose of a business is to make as much money as possible. The old story of business just gets purpose wrong. There are lots of purposes for a business. A company called Novo Nordisk wants to rid the world of diabetes. I wrote about in Saturday's Economic Times of India, several Indian companies like Mahindra and some of the Tata companies and others who have a purpose that's, includes building, includes nation building the stronger in India. And then there's some small companies who are trying to do their part to encourage more organic farming and lots of different things. There's not one purpose that works for all businesses. in purpose itself is critical. Think about your own life. Think about your own life as a human being. What's your purpose? What's your why? What gets you out of bed in the morning? It's probably not to make as much money as possible, even though, let me be clear, I don't think there's anything wrong with making as much money as you can ethically. I really don't see anything wrong with that. It's just that money doesn't really motivate people. What motivates us for the most part is, being a part of something bigger than ourselves or creating something. I have a friend who created a restaurant in Copenhagen called Noma, and it's routinely rated, or was rated, as the best restaurant in the world. And he said to me, he said, we didn't create Noma to make as much money as we can, though they've been very successful. He said, because, for the first 19 years, we didn't make any money. When I have students who come to me and say, hey, I want to start a company because I want to make a lot of money, I tell them to get a job, because you're more likely to make money with a real job, because starting a business is hard, and most of them fail. And entrepreneurs have to be serial. They have to do it again and again and again until they figure out the right way to do it. So, but they're driven by purpose. Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, and we're driven by the computer revolution, not by making billions of dollars, which they managed to do. And the same for most of the entrepreneurs that I know. It's not that making money is bad or irrelevant. Of course, you have to. It's that purpose comes first, and profits are an outcome of that. Purpose inspires us. It gives us meaning and discipline, and it brings people together. It helps us solve our most difficult problems. The second principle, which should come as no surprise to any of you who've been forced to read some stuff I've written, is that it's called the stakeholder unit of analysis principle. Any business has always and will always create and sometimes destroy value for customers, suppliers, employees, communities, and the people with the money, and maybe some others as well. Building and leading a business means getting these interests going in the same direction. The phrase I like as a amateur musician is harmonize their interest. Stakeholder interests are different, but they if you can get them to sound good together, get them going in the same direction, that's really the trick. It's a lot easier to do that if you have a sense of purpose. So those first two ideas, purpose and stakeholders, have to go together. Indeed, when I wrote this old book in 1984, I thought the stakeholder idea was so common sense that nobody would find it very interesting. I thought the interesting idea in the book, which wasn't common sense, is the idea about purpose. I think I called it enterprise strategy or something. The stakeholder idea is just, I grew up kind of poor on a dirt farm in the South in the US. And, we knew you had to deal with people you could affect or could affect you. I didn't understand why business theorists didn't figure that out. Now I came to that. I'm a philosopher by training. I wasn't trained in business. So it seems to me just common sense that in pretty much everything we do with somebody, and we need to worry about how things affect them. Stakeholders, though, it's important to dig a little bit deeper. Stakeholders have a joint interest. When you figure out how to satisfy customers, you're also figuring out some effects on suppliers, let's say, in communities, as well as employees and shareholders. Those effects go together, and the hard part is figuring out how to find win solutions. It's very easy to look for trade-offs, and economists love trade-offs. And that's the biggest barrier to building a really successful company. It's the trade-off thinking. Sometimes you have to find trade-offs. You have to use trade-offs. But a lot of times you can use your imagination to get beyond trade-offs. One of my favorite stories was told to me by a CEO of a large chemicals company many years ago, in which he was announcing the company had decided to clean up its act. It was a global company, very big, and was routinely seen as the dirtiest company on earth just because of their size. So they announced for some pretty lofty pollution goals like zero pollution in a generation. It's going to be a generational project, but in a business-like way, they set, stages and gates and interim targets the way you would in a business. And then he goes around making a speech to all the facilities all over the world, telling them, hey, we're serious about this. The engineers at one of the facilities, as he told the story, came to him and said, we can't meet this very first interim target. This plant and equipment's too old, this process is too dirty. We just can't do it. And the CEO says, well, we're going to have to close the plant. Why don't you get ready to close the plant? You want me to make a trade-off, environment, communities, where I put it on the one hand, employees on the other hand, community wins, employees lose. Engineers go away. They come back a few weeks later. They say to the CEO, well, a miracle has occurred. We figured out how to do it. The CEO says, well, what's it going to cost? Thinking millions of dollars, And the engineer said, actually, if we do it this new way, we're going to save money. Now, what's going on here? What's going on is if trade-offs are unacceptable, what we kick in is our creative imagination to figure out new solutions. And it's that win thinking that stakeholder theory has to encourage and that we need in this new story of business. Most businesses are successful because they figure out how to find a win-win in what used to be a win-lose. Capitalism works because we want to create something new and different. And what's important in it is our creative imagination. So 2 ideas. Purpose is important, and stakeholders are important. Now, you'll notice I said the purpose, values, and ethics principle. That's because purpose itself is not quite enough. We've seen lots of organizations that have a purpose, and their purpose is to harm or even kill members of other groups. So purpose has to be moderated by a sense of ethics and a sense of values. And that gets us to the 3rd idea, which is business is a societal institution. Yeah, it's a market institution. Yes, market forces are important. Yes, you have to deal with competitive strategy, but you also have to deal with societal forces. All the competitive strategy in the world won't tell you how to deal with COVID as a business. All the competitive strategy in the world won't help you deal with issues of injustice. And they're there in every society around the world. We must see business as a societal institution, as embedded in society and in other social institutions like healthcare and education and government, etc. And we must understand those relationships and how to make them better. Nowhere is this clearer than with respect to global warming. That is a societal issue that affects us all over the world. We've called this the business embeddedness principle. Business is connected with other societal institutions and with the natural physical world. We are at once citizens, consumers, parents, partners. We connect these institutions in our hearts. We need to connect them in our policies. We need business to play a role in society as an institution of hope. We need especially to grapple with this issue of global warming. I think how you say it matters. If it's climate change, hey, that's just the weather. If it's global warming, I think that sounds the correct alarm bells. One of the problems with seeing business as connected in society is the problem what we call crony capitalism, trying to change the rules so that they favor you and nobody else. We see this version of corruption happening all over the world. It's certainly in the US. I know it's in India. It's in every country I've been in. And the only way out of crony capitalism is to once again see business as this societal institution that has a sense of purpose, that tries to create value for its stakeholders. We will not solve the problems. Will not solve the problems that are in front of us: inequality, injustice, global warming, the pandemic. We won't solve those problems unless we can figure out this new story of business and how to use our creative imagination to make it work. Principle number 4, we call the human complexity principle. And it's, look, we're not one-dimensional economic actors. On this day in which the Nobel Prize in Economics is given, it's often given to folks who assume that people are one-dimensional economic actors. I think that's not the case this year, which is great, and certainly wasn't the case last year. Business works because we're complicated. We have many needs and wants, and we can cooperate together to create value for each other. I have here in my hand a cell phone. It's an iPhone, and I want you to think for a minute about what vocabularies, what disciplines, what vocabularies we had to create to be able to make an iPhone, a cell phone. Well, we had to literally create the vocabulary for metal. That somewhere in our past, metal cell phone cases didn't just grow on trees. We had to figure out what metal was and glass. We had to create the vocabulary of physics and what goes on the inside and networks, etc. Human beings, far from being one-dimensional economic maximizers, are creatures that can create vocabularies to solve their problems. And then we know how to cooperate together to make those solutions real in the world. Evolution looks like it's biased towards being a good cooperator. It selects for good cooperators over time. The idea that nature red in tooth and claw, that we're all out competing with each other all the time, that's the best way to understand who we are, I think if it was ever useful, is not useful anymore. As I said, business and capitalism works because we can cooperate together to create something that no one of us can create alone. And that's why I've often said that capitalism and business are the greatest system of social cooperation that we've ever invented, social cooperation that we've ever invented. And yes, I fully understand that competition and market forces are important. But as human beings, we are deeply complex. We have more than economic interest. There are a few people who look like all they do is maximize their economic self-interest in the short term. We generally call those people sociopaths. And at least in the US, I don't know about India, we elect them to high office. Uh, and that's nonpartisan from me. Rather, I think we need to see business and human beings as more complicated. We're at once self-interested and at once other regarding at the same time, as anybody who knows, who's ever been in love, who's ever had a child, knows that. Finally, so there's purpose, stakeholders, business as a societal institution, human beings is complicated. Final principle we call the integration thesis, and it's real simple. It says business and ethics go together. You can't separate out the business part from the ethics part. Nobody shows up in the morning, goes to the front desk of the company and said, here are my values. Would you keep them for me until I'm ready to go home? Because I'm going to go be a greedy little bastard business person for the rest of the day. It doesn't work like that. We have to see how business and ethics go together. We have to see how, what we're really capable of. Thinking of the incredible acts of heroism in the crisis some years ago in Mumbai, the Taj, where some employees literally gave their lives for the safety of some of their stakeholders. We see things like this around the world all the time. People, in fact, engage in acts of sacrifice for others. We also see, for every scandal-ridden company, I'm going to pick Enron as the poster child for that for a long time in the US. For every Enron, there are 10,000 companies of people just trying to do the right thing. Most business people, in my experience, again, which is worldwide, most business people tell the truth and keep their promises and act responsibly most of the time. And we need to expect that behavior from each other and our business. We need, we learn ethics from our early childhood caregivers. What we need is to get better at talking about it. We need to get better at putting business and ethics together. So these 5 critical ideas, purpose, stakeholders, society, humanity, and ethics, have to be combined with the old story. And I think if we can do this, if we can continue along the path that all of these organizations have set for us, I'm incredibly optimistic about the future. Now, some people want to know, okay, what's the financial result? Well, first of all, the results are more than financial, but there is some good news with this. What most people want to know is, if I act this way in business, am I guaranteed that I can make money? And my answer to that is no. If you want a guarantee, go buy a refrigerator. They come with guarantees. Management theories don't. because there's no guarantee if you try to maximize shareholder value that you're going to make any money. The global financial crisis made that perfectly clear, it seems to me. A better question is it possible to be financially successful if I manage a business this way? And the answer to that question is a resounding yes. There's study after study that shows that paying attention to stakeholders and values and ethics and purpose really can pay. It doesn't have to pay, but it can. And we know in our hearts that this is the right way to do things. Well, in short, what I've said is that we need some moral leadership in business. And by that, I mean not some righteous, I always know the right thing to do. Certainly, I've been teaching ethics for 40 years or so. And as I've gotten older, I've become more and more certain, actually, about less and less. Especially true as we encounter a wide world where there are lots of ways to run an ethical business. But we need leadership in critical conversations about our societies. I think these are best done with a sense of humility, with a sense of humor, and I remain incredibly optimistic because this new story inspires, empowers, engages employees. It activates business strategy in a way that maximized shareholder value, I think, does not. It's a foundation for value creation, and it leads to discipline, innovation, and efficiencies. And it makes our institutions, probably most important of all, it makes our business institutions places of hope where we can make our society a better one. We can be the generation that makes business better. And that's what the issue is for us, I think. And I'll say, and for you. Thank you very much for being patient. I'm happy to answer any questions. I see there are a lot of them in the chat, but I'll turn it back over to the moderators here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Freeman. It was a pleasure listening to you and me, as well as the remaining 77 members who are present for your talk. I think thoroughly enjoyed it. So I will start off with a question by one of our students, whose name is Ayush Raj. And he asks, the stakeholder theory, the way you mention it, give me 1 second, Dr. Freeman. This is, the stakeholder theory, the way you mention it, is basically needing a change of ideas, which is to move beyond just making profits, but carry ethical values with it. What, according to you, is the role of us, young minds or future entrepreneurs, to actually support this idea of change? And what are your suggestions for us to make that happen?
Well, that's a great question, Ayush. I think it's, in a way, kind of easy. First of all, if you go to work for a big corporate, you need to expect that behavior. You need to expect ethical behavior. You need to ask questions about, hey, why are we here? What's our purpose? Have we thought about this stakeholders' response? What are we doing with respect to societal issues? Now, it's hard to raise those questions when you're not at a top level. It's even hard there. So what I would suggest you do is you take a hard look at the companies you're going to choose to work for, and be sure that their values and your values have some compatibility. The second issue that you can do, so there's the sort of values compatibility issue, which is more important than salary. It's more important than opportunities for promotion, etc. Those things are important. But if you're stuck in a job where you kind of hate it because you don't feel good about the company you're working for, I can't imagine that. The second thing is we have a principle we try to use, or some of us try to use at Darden, from my colleague who teaches entrepreneurship at Darden, Sankaran Venkatraman. And Venkat articulates this principle as critique through creation. And that is, if you don't like something about a business, start one that's better. Start one, create something that gets rid of what you don't like. That's easy to say, and it's hard to do. But, you know, of course it's hard. That makes it worthwhile. I, for many years, was a student, and still am, of martial arts, of Taekwondo. And we had a teacher who would be having us do something that my old body just couldn't do. You know, it's like wrapping your foot around your ear, or, you know, something that was impossible. And we'd all be sweating, trying to figure out how to do this. And he would stop and say, easy to do or difficult to do. And the right answer, whether this was something difficult or not, was always very difficult, Kirsten, very difficult, teacher. And he would say all the time, of course it's difficult. Why waste your time with easy stuff? Of course, creating a business that's, yes, profitable and makes the world better is difficult. That means it's worth doing. Why waste your time with the easy stuff?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Freeman. And the next question comes from Anushya Borua, who is also one of our MBA students. And she says, how do, over the years of business, shareholders are given prime attention? So if we change or distribute our focus to other stakeholders, do you think that it will sit well with the shareholders? Or in other words, how do you suggest we cope up with or adapt to situations like this?
Well, I think you do that by being real successful. Look, I think even if all you care about is shareholder value, how are you going to do it? You're going to have great products for customers that make their lives better, so they buy them. You're going to have suppliers who want to make you better because it makes them better. You're going to have employees who show up not just for a check, but also show up because they're engaged in the work. You're going to have communities who want you there. And if you do those things and get lucky, you might make money. So there's not a disconnect in my mind between doing well for shareholders and doing well for other stakeholders. It's a little bit like, I believe it was a character in a Moliere novel who discovered he was speaking prose. Well, once you discover what you're really doing is creating value for stakeholders, you can improve the hell out of it. And it's improving how those value creation processes work for customers, suppliers, employees, and communities, and shareholders. That's important. Stakeholder theory has often been misinterpreted. It's often been misinterpreted as about corporate social responsibility. I've argued fairly consistently for 40 years that if you take the stakeholder idea seriously, you don't need corporate social responsibility. What you need is to fulfill your responsibilities to your stakeholders. I don't think there's much left over after that. So certainly Milton Friedman saw, he saw something that would be like stakeholder theory, which it was around, but not very well known in his day, as sort of a corporate social responsibility and against shareholder interest. I don't see that at all. I've always been incredibly pro-shareholder, but how do you do that? You do that by focusing on stakeholders and purpose, not by adopting an idea that shareholders are sort of the only group that counts. I think that leads to the diminished shareholder value. Now, part of this depends in part on the governance laws in countries. In the US, it's actually not the law that companies have to maximize shareholder value. It's the myth, but it's not the law. I know in India, you have the 2% corporate social responsibility rule. I think there have been good stories with that and bad stories with that. And so those things matter. But what really gives a company juice is purpose. That's what really engages people to perform way outside the norms. And that's what we need, is more purpose. And I think shareholders will be happy for the most part.
Thank you, Dr. Freeman. One of my colleagues, Jeremy Wade, had a question. Jeremy, if you can unmute yourself and ask the question to Dr. Freeman rather than me reading out, I think it will be easier for everybody.
Let's see, is this the question on surveillance capitalism?
Yeah. He says, any thoughts on Zuboff's theory of surveillance capitalism? Yeah, is there a danger that big tech will entrench the shareholder capitalism?
Well, a couple of things on that. I'm not sure I know exactly what surveillance capitalism is. My reading is there's an old-fashioned notion of privacy, which just doesn't exist in the world anymore. And we're in a transition phase where we're trying to figure out what privacy is. We used to think that markets were or we have this idea that markets are somehow private, but they never were. Markets were always the places that people went to trade and exchange. It was in public. The issue now is all of these transactions are easy to figure out what they are and to sell the data to other people, etc. And we're trying to figure out what makes sense for that. I don't think big tech entrenches shareholder capitalism. I'm sure there are some big tech companies who do, but there's certainly big tech companies who don't as well. And so I'm a little leery of the generalizations that Zuboff makes about surveillance capitalism, and I'm a little leery of the generalizations about big tech. Though often what happens is, new technology and new technology companies give us moral problems that we didn't have before. One of my favorite examples of that is, I learned don't lie, cheat, and steal, as many of you did, at my parents' and grandmother's knee. Now, I didn't learn anything about whether I should download something off a P2P network, which I didn't have the copyright to. I didn't learn anything about that because those things didn't exist. I didn't learn anything about end-of-life medical care because that really didn't exist when I was growing up. So we have to take our sense of ethics and have critical conversations about the issues that are in front of us. And there are a lot of them, a lot of new technologies. If people are right, we ain't seen nothing yet with AIs. And there are all kinds of issues on this. We've had several special issues of the Journal of Business Ethics on some of these new technologies, and the issues are complicated as hell. So I rather than condemn surveillance capitalism, whatever that means, or condemn big tech, I want to say what we really need are critical and sophisticated and nuanced conversations about ethics and technology. One of our co-authors of The Power of And, Kirsten Martin, is a professor at University of Notre Dame here in the US. And that's really her specialty in thinking about that. And I've learned a great deal from her and have a lot to learn as well.
Thank you. So Jasmine, one of our students asks, as you mentioned in your talk, business and ethics need to be combined together to be successful. Then what, according to you, are the major ethical issues that businesses faces today?
Well, I think crony capitalism is certainly one. How is business connected into the rest of society? In the U.S., this is absolutely critical because it's issues around gender and race, in inequality, and I know you have similar but different issues around that in India. It's an ethics issue, I think, how we have demonized people that disagree with us. The whole idea of fake news and what's truth, and are we in a post-truth world, is really difficult, as is the role of science and the sort of anti-science movement, etc. If you add to that, so a number of CEOs I've talked to said, we just don't know. We didn't learn how to deal with all these societal issues. If there's if there's a bombing somewhere of a synagogue or a mosque or a church, do I say something to all my employees, because I might have Christian employees or Muslim employees or Jewish employees? Do I have to say something whenever there's a tragedy? Do I have to do something or contribute? What do I do to encourage racial and gender equality? How do I think about healthcare? What do I do with respect to education, especially education for those who are not as well off? What do I do with respect to sorting out questions of support for minority entrepreneurs? Or the list of questions is huge. I'm doing a new course this year called Societal Issues in Business, in which the idea is to invent some frameworks for the students to routinely factor in these societal issues, not in a philanthropic CSR way, but to factor them into what effects are there on the business model. And so trying to see ethics not as an add-on, but as something that affects the business model. I actually believe that managers have ethical obligations to customers, suppliers, employees, communities, people with money, and keeping those front and center, rather than just say, well, this is just about the business. This is a business. Yeah, it's a business. You have values, you have ethics, you have people that care, and it's a different way to think about the business, so that ethics is in the center, and profits is there too. And again, this is a lot easier to say than it is to do.
And Suryansh Pathak asks, the global financial crisis of 2007-2008 had so many stakeholders too, internal as well as external, as it happened. Regardless of the magnitude of the people involved, the external stakeholders paid a heavy price for what is often said to be the fault of internal stakeholders. And I personally can attest to that, was because I was in New Jersey then and I saw the situations in the city. And where did we go wrong, or capitalism go wrong, and how can we have avoided it, or we can avoid it?
Well, more CSR is not going to help us avoid that. Where that went wrong is very clear. You call it internal stakeholders. I would just say it's boards and senior managers and their commitment to wringing the last cent of shareholder value out of other stakeholders. I mean, when you think about an investment bank that's leveraged up 30 to 1, it doesn't take a mathematical genius to know that's a very thin margin for success. When you think about separating the ethics from doing that, so that you put together tranches of things that are misleading, and that you get the rating companies to mislead on. Those are pretty, they may have been legal, but it's certainly what went wrong. So I would say the main problem with the global financial crisis was the shareholder primacy theory, that you were doing all this for the shareholders to make money. What you did was you destroyed trillions of dollars in shareholder wealth, and you destroyed communities and employees' lives, etc., all over the world. So I can't believe there's anybody who still believes trying to maximize shareholder value is a good idea. Now, a lot of the response of finance professors and finance people was, well, wait, I mean, we didn't mean, short-term shareholder value. We meant long-term shareholder value. But hang on. If shareholder value is measured via stock price, we live life in the short term. I mean, there's no such thing as long-term shareholder value. How do you measure that? It's unmeasurable. What you measure is short-term shareholder value. So I think the whole theory, certainly from a philosophical standpoint, kind of comes undone. And that's why we need this new story of business. It's not that shareholder value is unimportant. It's that it's connected to stakeholder value, to purpose, to society, to a more human view of us as human beings, and to ethics. To say we need to put those things together, shareholders are going to be better off, and the other stakeholders will as well. Now, you got to be careful. People make mistakes. We often engage in what we would call saints and sinners thinking. The way this goes is, well, most businesses are sort of sinners. They're only worried about the money. But there may be some good companies, I'll grant you that. And then whenever a good company does something bad, they get moved over into the sinner category. Well, look, I don't know any saints in the real world. And I don't know any sinners all the time. Again, those are the sociopaths. What we need is if you're a business that, we're at once saint and sinner. We can do good things and we can make mistakes. Oscar Wilde, a famous playwright, put it best. He says, every saint's got a past, every sinner's got a future. And we need this more complicated, nuanced view of what human beings are. Let me stop there so we get to some other questions.
Okay, thank you. One of our colleagues, Professor Anshu Sharma, has a question, and she asks, how can organizations deal with ethical dilemmas arising due to pro-social motives / conflicting values?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think what you have to do is you have to have, there are two kinds of systems of values in business, at least two. I'm going to call the first kind dead values. They work like this. Yeah, we've got some values. I I saw them on a mouse pad, or I've got a card, or let me look and see what they are. And then there's a set of values that are alive. The conversation is alive. People talk about them. They've figured out what they mean to them. It's a company that I really like called The Motley Fool. It's an investment company. And Motley Fool has its set of values. And then it asks each person who's an employee to figure out their own, they call it their Motley value, what those values mean to them. And everybody's got their Motley value on their desk. You can tell, you ask people about it by way of introducing yourself to it. But I spent a day with them. I had one by the end of the day. And what they talk about when they talk about strategy and customers, and this is an investment company, they talk about it in terms of values, in addition to talking about it in terms of finance, etc. So if you can put the values, front and center in the conversation, and figure out how to have, conversations about that, that's easier. Ellen Oster and I wrote this book called Bridging the Values Gap, which is really our combined sort of 50 or 60 years of consulting with companies to help them do that. What happens is people say, well, you just have to know your values. And then somebody will quote Shakespeare and they'll say, yes, this above all, to thine own self be true, and thou canst be false to any man, says Polonius to his son Laertes in Hamlet. And of course, the problem with that quote, so you just have to know your values. The problem with that quote, of course, is Shakespeare's portraying Polonius as a fool, because Shakespeare understood knowing your values is a very hard thing to do. Hamlet has no idea what his values are. So we tried to argue that for a conversation to be alive in a company, yeah, you got to start with where you think they are, but you have to be willing to dig into your past. You have to be willing to dig into the set of relationships that you're enmeshed in. And you have to be willing to, dig in to what you're trying to achieve and accomplish. And that just being authentic, knowing your values, it isn't enough. That's a project. That's a lifelong project. So that's not probably the kind of answer you're looking for, Professor Sharma, but it's the best I can do, is to try to figure out how you lead better, more critical conversations inside a company.
Thanks, Dr. Freeman. And you can have more interaction with Professor Sharma once you come for the FDP for her research center.
Good.
And Bhavya, do you have time to take a couple of more questions, Dr. Freeman?
Yeah, sure, I'm fine. Sure.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
So one of our MBA students, Bhavya, asks, many companies practicing CSRs are round-tripping funds back to activities that are beneficial to them. You emphasized on the need for a moral leadership in business. How do you suggest that is promoted, considering many companies in India practice this out of the fear of penalty from the enforcement mechanism?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, I'm not in favor of mandatory CSR. I'm not in favor of CSR at all. I'm in favor of creating value for your stakeholders. And I think you're exactly right. Sometimes you do things out of the fear of penalty. And some of that can be good stuff, and some of it can be bad. I would point out, though, that ethics is not just about being other regarding. It's not just about being self-sacrificing, because your own interests count too. Not many ethical theories ask us to completely negate our self interest. But my interests count, as do the interests of others that I'm trying to help. I don't know that much about how the CSR law has worked. I'm certain it's done some good, and I'm certain there are cases where it hasn't done some good, where people have used it, just appear to be doing something good. That's why I'm not really in favor of it. You have to deal with it, and I would say if you can deal with it in a way that follows your purpose, that makes your stakeholders, especially communities, probably better off. That's the way to think about it.
Great, Dr. Freeman. And it would be unfair for me if I don't ask you the first question that came in the chat box when you were delivering the talk. And it was from Sai Sujan, who asked, does ethics and values really be applicable at every point of managing a business? If so, if not, what are the deviations that can be accepted in the ethics and values for a business development?
Well, I would say theoretically, ethics and values are always possible for it to be an issue. It's rare when a decision doesn't affect the well-being of any stakeholders. It's usually not a very important decision to make. So again, I want to think about ethics and values not as just life or death or lifeboat decisions, but they're there in terms of which stakeholders you're trying to find win-wins for, and which you're not. I wish we didn't make the distinction between this is a business decision, this is an ethics decision, because it seems to me both are there in most of the things that we do. Sometimes it makes sense to focus on, let's say, the financial part of a decision, because we're trying to figure out where the money's coming from, if we can afford something or others. Sometimes it pays to figure out the ethics, part of a decision, because we're not sure what the effects is going to be on our community, or we're not sure what the effects are on our employees. And there's no one way to think about it for all possible decisions. Depends on the problem you're trying to solve. I'm not arguing you always have to have decision making that puts ethics first, because some problems are not like that. You do have to have decision making where ethics should be raised in most any decision, and you have to have decision making where the technical parts of the decision could be raised in any decision. So I see the challenge as how do we put those things together more than one versus the other. That's not a great answer, but lots of times we're stuck in a story, and the story tells us how to think about things. Look, you got to think about this as, here's the ethics part, here's the business part. If we adopted this kind of new story where business and ethics are more integrated, we probably wouldn't frame the problem that way. So that's what makes changing the story hard, because we automatically have problems framed with the old story, and we need a reframing of many of the ways that we think in business, I think.
Great. The questions just keeps flooding in, but due to the paucity of time, we will take two more questions. And
okay,
if it's okay with Dr. Freeman, I can basically jot down the questions that you haven't answered and probably send it across to you, and you can take a look at it
sure,
at some point of time. Thank you so
Happy
much.
to.
So The next question comes from Dr. Subhanjan Sengupta, and he asks that what narrative do we need in organizations to emphasize on business ethics in the face of an overpowering post-pandemic economic recovery? And what can be the actor-led mechanism to achieve the same?
Well, that's another great question. You know, I'm not sure I have an answer to that. I would say the narrative is very straightforward. The narrative is what I've been calling the new story. And I don't think it matters what version of it you have. I do think you have to deal with purpose and stakeholders and society and humanity and ethics in that narrative. But I don't think there's one way to run a business. I think that's what academics want a lot, certainly in the US, is they want me to tell them the one and only one way to be sure I've identified all my stakeholders and who's a stakeholder for all businesses at all times, and how do I deal with all possible situations. And I think I understand why academics want that, but it's to me, it's fool's errand. And I think the issue here in a post-pandemic world is going to be, look, there are going to be lots of business models. There are going to be business models that might put doing something about injustice and inequality in the center. There are going to be business models that put trying to fix how value eventually gets created for shareholders in the center. And I don't think there's one of those that we could say is going to be better than another. I'm a pragmatist as a philosopher. All that means is I think we need a lot of experiments. We need to, and this is tricky because, you know, especially when we start thinking about the role of government policies are usually one size fits all, one size for everybody. And yet I think we need a lot of experiments. Think about where this is clearest is in global warming. We need lots of experiments with new technologies, some of which are not going to work, some of which might do some harm, but we're not going to solve this without those experiments, without those new businesses. And I'm not sure that there is kind of one narrative. I hope that there are lots of narratives that emerge, that there are lots of ways to think about business, lots of ways I and others haven't thought of. So that's my hope, and I think that's in part, as the question says, that's kind of our job as thinkers in business, is to help companies figure that out, help students figure that out. Because for the students that are there, you gotta, you know, my time's almost over. You've got to invent the companies that, you know, make business a lot better, that solve a lot of the societal problems that we have. I have a friend whose CEO says that of a big company who says, well, you know, Ed, yours and my generation have done exactly what our parents' generation did, which is we leave you, we did the best we could with the problems our parents left us, and we leave you, our children, with a set of impossible problems for you to solve as well. And I think that's probably right. From my talking to people all over the world, and today has been no different, I'm very optimistic that you can do this. You'll figure this out in the next few years. I won't see the end of it, but I'm glad you're going to figure it out.
Great answer, Dr. Freeman. And of course, you'll be there to see the event. And The last question is it's something that's close to my heart. I have had numerous arguments about this with a lot of friends and colleagues of mine. And it says, it has actually been asked by one of our students, but probably I would have ended up asking the same question. It is, tobacco companies make more bad than good to the society. Well, debatable, but whatever. But at the same time, it follows the law and values its members within its organization. So how can we justify the ethics and values of tobacco company?
Well, this is a question that's dear to my heart. I have done some consulting for tobacco companies in the past because I thought they were trying to get better at what they were doing. And I'm a little bit of a libertarian, though it might not look like that. I just think libertarians need to be responsible. And if I could help them be responsible, then that was something worth doing. I think it's also true that one of the things, at least for me, is you really don't want government telling you where you could find your pleasure, unless it's cases that involve children or exploitation, etc. And smoking's pleasurable, and it's voluntary. So I think it's, and yes, it has bad effects. I think that my take on the industry is they know that, and they also know. Well, let me tell you what I told them. I said, look, I want a product that gives me the pleasure of smoking without the health risk. And until you figure that out, you have a lousy product. You need to figure out how to make your product a lot better, because nobody, even if I want to smoke, I don't want the health risk. And so until you figure that out, you got a lousy product, and you're never going to figure it out if you call your critics antis. You know, I hear the critics saying, "Hey, the product's lousy, and you need to fix that." So I don't know. I'm kind of leery of the so-called sin industries that government can fix that. I think one of the things we can do is, as has happened with the tobacco companies, at least for some of them, is try to make them as responsible as they can be. And I think that's, that's true for a number of industries. That means no marketing to kids. That means very, very strict procedures around advertising and marketing, accepting and promoting the health risk on a voluntary basis, etc.
Thank you, and yeah, that's.
I'm sure it's nothing you haven't heard before.
Yeah, no, it's an evil, but it's a pleasurable evil.
Well, I don't know that I would call it an evil. There are evils. I mean, I think something like child pornography is an evil.
Okay, fair enough. I'll give that
tobacco,
to you.
I'm not.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Freeman. And as we discussed, I will just transcribe all the remaining of questions. I'll send it to you so that if you can answer,
Sure.
we'll share it with our students and faculties alike.
Happy to.
And before I officially thank you, Dr. Freeman, there is a little portion of the introduction that I think Chitrakalpa missed. For those of you who are still here and who joined a little late, Dr. Freeman is an avid follower of cricket. He loves the Men in Blues, and he also follows IPL. Now take that.
Yeah.
In fact, when we were having this discussion and he came up and told us that, I was probably more surprised than what you guys are now, but thank you for embracing our version of baseball along with the original version.
I was so sad when Sachin Tendulkar retired that I wasn't going to get to see him anymore.
Okay, for everybody, I was not bluffing. how often do you hear an American professor talk about Sachin Tendulkar here? Yep, but thank you very much, Dr. Freeman, on behalf of the Center of Research in Emerging Economies. It was an absolute pleasure and absolute honor to listen to you. I thank you for your time. I thank you for agreeing to deliver the talk. And I remember you emailing me back within 10 minutes saying that you'll be more than happy to help. And that was like, I read the email 3 times because I couldn't believe that it was yours. But anyway, thank you.
Well, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. And you've given me a lot to reflect on, lots of questions.
The honor was all ours. And I also want to thank Chitrakalpa, Anjuman, and the other members, Suganna, and the other members of the center, Minakshi, who worked relentlessly behind the scene to make this talk a success. And thank you very much once again. I'll definitely get in touch with you with the questions and probably for any future talks or discussions. And thanks for your time. Pleasure to have you. And before I wind up, I just wanted to remind everybody that our next talk is on the 15th of October, this coming Thursday, where Dr. David Simchi-Levy from MIT will be talking about supply chain resiliency. So Dr. Freeman, if you're interested, I'll be more than happy to send you that link.
Great, thanks.
And it was an absolute honor to have you over here. Thank you so much.
Great.
Pleasure. And good night, everybody. Thanks to all the participants. And last but not the least, thanks for all those great questions that you asked Dr. Freeman. Thank you very much. And with this, we wind up. And thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dr. Freeman. Thanks, all the center members.
Thanks. Take care.
Take care, Dr.
Bye.
Freeman. Take care, everybody. Good night.